Our speaker tonight is Lee Habib. Mr. Habib is Vice President of Content at Sales Media Group, which syndicates national talk shows hosted by Hugh Hewitt, Dennis Prager, Larry Elder, Sebastian Gorka, Mike Gallagher, and Eric Metaxas. A University of Virginia School of Law graduate, Mr. Habib is the founder of American Private Radio and host of its storytelling show, Our American Stories, a weekday radio show syndicated across the United States. He is a weekly columnist for Newsweek, and he has written for numerous other publications, including National Review, The Federalist, and LifeSet. He is speaking this evening about understanding America through its stories. Please join me in welcoming Lee Habib.
So, to start any talk on storytelling, it's best to start with Plato. Those who tell the stories rule society, he said. He was right then, and he's right now. We know that the most important book ever written in world history, and the biggest blockbuster of all time, the Bible, is nothing but an endless series of stories. And some pretty damn good ones. Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, the prodigal son. And some people think the O.J. trial may have been the trial of the century. But the trial of Jesus Christ before the Sanhedrin may have been the most important in world history. The fact is, the four Gospels and their parables transformed history and changed the world. Indeed, that's what's so powerful about the Bible when you think about it. Human beings across the globe have for centuries been stepping into those stories and seeing ourselves in them. For me, it was the story of Jonah that had the most meaning in my life. We all have at least one story we can point to in the Bible that draws us closer to God and to each other. Stories shape reality in human beings, explained the great Brooklyn novelist Paul Auster, and the poet Muriel Rukeyser famously said these words: "The world is made up of stories, not atoms." If they are all correct, why don't we who care about our nation's story take the business of storytelling more seriously? It's odd because we take the business of every other business in American life seriously, except the most important one. The left has invested vast fortunes in storytelling pipelines and filled them with stories that shape what Americans think about everything: business, family, government, capitalism, our history, even God. To understand how we let this happen, we must first understand why we let it happen. First, we really don't think storytelling matters. How do I know? How many of us would be happy if a child of ours told us they wanted to be an actor or a writer? Now, if that same child told us they wanted to join the Marine Corps, I know how we'd react. We'd be proud. At NYU's Tisch School of the Arts a few years ago, Robert De Niro gave the commencement speech. He told a few jokes about his craft, and then he got serious. He implored the graduates to work hard and be fearless. He reminded them that they're part of an important tribe called artists, and that their work matters and shapes the life of their country. De Niro spoke to them like they were new Army recruits. That's because the left views careers in the arts the way we view careers in the military and business. They believe in this stuff. We don't. Here's the second reason we failed up till now. Rather than invest in storytelling, we've spent billions of dollars on think tanks over the past few decades, on public policy research. Those PhDs and their work serve a vital role, no doubt. But do we believe white papers and op-eds can change the country? That facts, debate, and our superior arguments alone can change the narrative of a country? When we do spend money on media, we pour billions into political ads every election cycle. What do we have to show for it? Like I said, what do we have? It's actually tragic, because if you think about this, the people who are getting these advertising dollars, Comcast, Disney, are the very people who use our advertising dollars to funnel Jimmy Kimmel's show and pay for all the entertainment that attacks us, or actually funding our enemies' platforms. No disrespect, but asking PhDs and politicians to change the culture is like asking an NFL linebacker like Clay Matthews to be a ballerina. Rather than do what we naturally do in any other business, which is compete, We have chosen an interesting alternative and an unattractive one, whining. And by the way, we whine endlessly about Hollywood, media bias, and to be fair, we have a lot to whine about. When's the last time you saw a businessman cast as the good guy and a bureaucrat as the bad guy on a TV show? Or a good guy priest and a bad guy union boss in a movie? A long time ago, actually. It was Rod Steiger playing the corrupt union boss and Karl Malden, the heroic priest, in Elia Kazan's 1954 masterpiece, On the Waterfront. Remember the scene where the dock worker is killed by union goons for testifying against their bosses? And there's Father Barry in that boat calling out the bad guys. One thug threw a can at the father's head. Another yelled, "Go back to your church, Father." He yells back, "This is my church." It made our hair stand up on our heads, our bodies. It was so beautiful. So why do stories move people in ways facts and arguments can't? It's simple. Human beings are hardwired to absorb the narrative form. Stories have structure, characters, plot, themes, and emotion, all of which reflect life. Stories change hearts, they change minds, they change everything. That's why it is easy for me to assert that storytelling is the world's oldest and best killer app. And stories live in the hearts and minds of people long after they're told. Take Arthur Miller's plays, which revolve mostly around father-son relationships. But always there's that scene that hammers capitalism, like the one in Death of a Salesman, where Willie Loman begs for his job while his boss plays with a machine on his desk. Miller wrote that play in 1949. He died in 2006. People are still moved by that story. The power that media ownership confers to the left on the storytelling front is profound, and the biggest advantage is this. They choose the stories that get told, but much more important, they choose the stories that don't get told. That curation power affects outcomes. If artists want their stories chosen, they'd best comport with the curator's worldview, which drives artists to censor themselves without even knowing it, because they need the work. That's why so many artists are liberal. Their bosses are. Another power of media ownership is its asymmetric nature. A handful of owners make the majority of us feel as if we're minorities in our own country. It's why dictators always seize the media, because what they're seizing is their nation's story. Sadly, the left just did that, but not by force. We just kind of let them. Back in 2004, the author Louisa Lim visited 4 Beijing universities. What would happen, he wondered, when he showed students a photo of Tank Man? Would they recognize it? You know the iconic picture. The lone man, 2 shopping bags in hand, standing in front of a line of tanks in defiance of the crackdown by the Chinese government at Tiananmen Square in 1989. It turned out that only 15% of the Beijing students recognized the picture. That wasn't an accident. As Lim explained in his book, The People's Republic of Amnesia, Tiananmen Revisited, the Chinese authorities were determined to blot out public memory of the protests. George Orwell knew why. He said this: "The most effective way to destroy a people is to obliterate their understanding of their own history." In America, we have a different problem. Many on the left who don't care for America, capitalism, or the Constitution work hard to promote the most shameful aspects of our story, while erasing from public memory our most positive aspects. It's China in reverse, and a very different kind of amnesia is setting in. We conservatives own a few media platforms, Fox News, Talk Radio, some websites, but it's mostly news and opinion. It's programming designed to feed the choir and to preach to the choir, not grow it. We've invested little in storytelling platforms that will attract new fans to this great brand called America. And we're the business people? We're the smart guys? In spoken word formats, the storytelling elephant in the room is NPR. They have 30 million people listening and 350 million in annual revenue, with only 10% coming from the government. NPR also dominates the podcast world, with 5 of the top 10 podcasts in the country. Several years ago, with the help of some national donors and Hillsdale College, a team of storytellers got together to launch a nonprofit alternative to NPR and a daily 2-hour syndicated storytelling show. one that celebrates America and the events and people who made the country great. From the arts to sports and business to history, Our American Stories was designed to tell the story of America to Americans. Many of the stories revolve around character, resilience, and the power and persistence of imagination. This is a story about an improbable story about an author of America's songbook. Few people write as many hits. Fewer still write as many standards. Fewer still write songs that become part of our national identity. White Christmas and God Bless America, both of which this one man wrote, are a part of our cultural DNA. He did it without formal training. He couldn't read or write music and played almost entirely in the key of F sharp because it was easier for his untrained fingers to play the elevated, well-spaced black keys. He said this, "The black keys are right under your fingers. The key of C is for people who study music." Irving Berlin's story is about many things: hard work, adversity, creativity, but America itself. He was born Israel Berlin in Russia in 1888, one of 8 children, and son to a cantor in the local synagogue. His family fled Russia after their village was destroyed in an anti-Semitic pogrom. Berlin's only memory was of his father, quote, lying in a blanket by the side of a road, watching his house burn to the ground. His family settled in New York, but there would be more tragedy to come in young Irving's life. None was worse than the loss of his father when he was 8. It was at a job waiting tables to support his family that he discovered a particular talent. His tips skyrocketed when he hummed songs of the day. Singing at tables soon turned into a lifetime of songwriting. In 1911, his Alexander's Ragtime Band climbed to number 2 on the Billboard charts. But ragtime wasn't his thing. He wanted to create his own version of American music, something romantic that appealed to the masses. He did just that. He wrote over 1,500 songs. He told his biographer he didn't believe in inspiration and that his most successful compositions were the result of hard work. One of his successes started as a failure. Berlin wrote God Bless America originally in 1918 while serving in the army, but he couldn't find a buyer. In 1938, as Hitler was rising to power, Berlin pulled that song out of his drawer. Kate Smith recorded it, and the rest was history. Berlin's daughter wrote that her father meant every word of that song. Quote, "It was the land he loved. It was his home sweet home. He, the immigrant who made good, was saying thank you to his country." Writing one anthem would be enough for any mortal. But in 1941, Berlin wrote another, White Christmas, which would sell 50 million copies for Bing Crosby and become the best-selling single of all time and one of the world's most beloved Christmas songs. Those two anthems may be the most compelling aspect of Berlin's legacy. A Jew wrote White Christmas, and a Russian wrote God Bless America, and he was the same damn guy. Only in America is such a thing possible, folks. Only in America is Irving Berlin's life possible. He died at the age of 101, a wealthy man, in large part because he owned his own publishing catalog. America's artists, Berlin included, owe a debt of gratitude to our nation's founders, who secured not just property rights, but intellectual property too, and the freedom to write about anything without recourse from their own government. It is why American artists are the most prolific in the world, because they're the freest in the world and live in a place where their ideas are protected too, and by our nation's founder in the Constitution itself, Article 1. The next story is about that founder, because it wasn't any founder who wanted to protect ideas. He was a founder who worked hard to protect ideas through something called a patent, because he was himself an inventor, a writer, and a publisher. Benjamin Franklin understood the power of ideas. More importantly, he understood the value of ideas. He became a very rich man from Poor Richard's Almanac. The story reflects a deep division, the one I'm about to tell you, within our not yet formed country. A division that split not just fellow countrymen, but families too. And the consequences for choosing a side in this division was not simply a tweet storm or a Facebook post. Quote, An awful silence pervaded the house as we were called up one after another to the table of the President of Congress, Benjamin Rush said, to sign what was believed by many at the time to be our own death warrant. Rush was right. The British government considered the Declaration of Independence a treasonous document, and treason was a capital crime. How divided was America? One look at Benjamin Franklin's family tells the story. The printer, inventor, writer, and diplomat was a driving force of the American Enlightenment, but his own home was torn apart by our first Civil War. Franklin's son, William, was illegitimate, but he had all the advantages that any other boy in this world could want. Throughout their lives, father and son were extremely close. Franklin even used his influence to secure his son the royal governorship of New Jersey. Neither man could have imagined they'd one day be forced to choose between king and country. The father joined the cause of the Patriots late and urged his son to join him. William insisted that Dad join the Loyalists. That choice led to the son's arrest and a 2-year stint in the worst prison in America, the Litchfield Gaol in Connecticut. Quote, "It was a destination of last resort for outlaws condemned to be hanged, convicted murderers, reprobates, and traitors," wrote historian David Epstein. After his release from prison, William emigrated to England, never to return home. A few years before his death, Ben Franklin received a letter from his son, who was hoping for a chance at reconciliation. The father wrote back promptly, and imagine getting this kind of a letter from your dad, quote, "Nothing has hurt me so much, son, and affected me with such keen sensation as to find myself deserted in my old age by my only son. And not only deserted, but to find him taking up arms against me in a cause wherein my good fame, fortune, and life were all at stake." That was it. The two men would never reconcile. Franklin died a wealthy man. He left his son nothing. The political divide today is still about power and a distant city. But that distant city isn't London. It's Washington, D.C. It's a fight we've been having since our founding. Fights about power, fights about sovereignty. That last story was situated in the 18th century. This next is about one of America's great 20th century leaders, Martin Luther King. His Christian faith was an animating force in his life, as was the book he dedicated his life study to, the Bible. Bill Maher, the comedian, once described the Bible as a book most Christians don't actually read. He said this, "It's like a software license. Christians scroll down to the bottom and click, 'I agree.'" Martin Luther King thought differently. The Bible wasn't a software license. It was software code, a deep, mysterious code authored by a God for man's eternal purposes. Indeed, he found the Bible so compelling, King, so relevant in the 20th century, that his undergraduate degree and PhD were both in Bible studies. Leaving God out of Martin Luther King's life story and the Bible is like leaving automobiles out of Henry Ford's life, or hamburgers out of Ray Kroc's. But that's precisely what the media does at every turn, every year, when they celebrate his life. Take the last night of King's life. As he headed into Memphis in 1968, he knew he was in danger. Quote, "There's no way you can keep somebody from killing you," he told reporters, "if they really want to kill you." Bomb threats delayed his flight into Memphis that night, and though King was troubled, he told supporters, quote, "I'd rather be dead than afraid." Then came his speech at the Mason Temple the night of April 3rd. It was as if the 39-year-old knew his life will soon end. A major theme of that speech was fear. And by the way, is it not a major theme of the Bible? The other was the story, the Good Samaritan, a parable told by Jesus in the Gospel of Luke. King told the audience about a trip he and his wife made along the Jericho Road and why he thought 2 men passed a stranger in need and why one didn't. Quote, and this is from the sermon directly, "It's a winding, meandering, dangerous road, conducive to ambushing," he told the audience. "And you know, it's possible that the priest and the Levite looked over at that man on the ground and wondered if the robbers were still around. Or it's possible they felt the man on the ground was acting like he'd been robbed and hurt in order to lure them there for easy seizure. And so the first question Levite asked was, 'As I stop to help this man, what will happen to me?' Then the Good Samaritan came by, and he reversed the question. 'If I don't stop to help this man, what will happen to him?' That's the question before you tonight, King preached. A few minutes later, the speech, which had by now turned into a sermon, started its prophetic turn. Like anybody, he said, I'd like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will, King told the spellbound audience. He's allowed me to go up to the mountaintop, and I've looked over it, and I've seen the promised land, and I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that as we a people will, in the end, finally, we will get to the promised land. On the eve of April 4th, not long before he was gunned down at the Lorraine Hotel in Memphis, King's last words were to a musician named Ben Branch, who was scheduled to perform at an event later on that night. Ben, he said, make sure you play Take My Hand, Precious Lord. Play it real slow. Play it pretty. The enduring truth of this story, one the media cannot rewrite, is this. Martin Luther King's desire to serve the God he loved changed forever the country he loved. This last story that I'm about to tell you is a story of a city and a disaster, the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, and the even more remarkable story of the Great Chicago Recovery. Experts disagree on how that fire started. Some say it was a cow, others say it was vandals. But everyone agrees on why the fire started. It was Chicago's remarkable growth. In 1840, the city had a mere 4,500 residents. 10 years later, it passed the 30,000 mark. By 1860, it had grown to 100,000. And by 1870, 300,000. What led to all that growth? As the saying goes, location, location, location. Chicago was near the center of the country, near where the waterways and railways met. It was a perfect place for anything and anyone to get anywhere. Timing also played a part. America was going through a transformation from a rural power to an industrial power. But how did all of that growth, all of that life, lead to a near-death experience? As a Chicago historian explained, Chicago had to build quickly, so they built it all out of wood. It was quick and easy and cheap. Mother Nature played her part too. A meteorologist, Tom Skilling, said, quote, it was an exceedingly dry summer and fall. Worse still, winter was approaching, and those wood houses were filled with firewood. The Chicago fire, it turns out, wasn't just predictable. It was inevitable. It started out on the west side and quickly roared out of control, a steady wind propelling the inferno from block to block and even across the Chicago River. 30 hours later, the fire finally ran out of fuel because there was nothing left to burn. The fire claimed nearly 300 lives, a third of the city lay in ruins, and 100,000 people were homeless. Most of the hotels, stores, and banks were destroyed. By the way, that's State Street. A picture in a second will show you that same shot, same angle, 20 years later. What happened next revealed the character of the city and the nation. There was no FEMA back then, no Illinois emergency management, no one to blame, no one to sue, and no appetite for victimhood. Even before the bricks stopped smoking, the city's leaders were planning a comeback. The Reverend Robert Collier told his congregation these words, we have not lost our geography. Nature called the lakes, the forests, and the prairies together in convention long before we were born, and they have decided that on this spot, a great city would be rebuilt. Within 48 hours, 12 of the 29 banks that burned down were operating in makeshift facilities to get money to customers. Bankers got busy raising capital. One sent letters to bankers all over the globe urging them to invest and loan money to the great people of Chicago. Chicago was rebuilt at an unimaginable pace. By 1880, its population reached 500,000. And by 1890, it passed the 1 million mark, becoming the second biggest city in America. Same street, same camera angle. The people of Chicago did all of it without the help of the state or federal government. American optimism, resilience, character, and capitalism itself rebuilt the city. Folks, we must start telling the story of America to Americans. Stories about all that's good and decent and beautiful about this country. We must address matters of the heart, too. Not talking about love is where we all go wrong, because it's love that builds a city. We must tell stories about faith, too, and the beautiful things we do because of our faith. America is unimaginable without it. Because the battle lines in America are not just between left and right. In the end, they're between up versus down, and that is the material world versus the spiritual world. Folks, to continue to let the left alone tell the story of America isn't just gross negligence, it's cultural suicide. We have great stories to tell. Let's start telling them. How hard can it be? After all, liberals do it. That's all, folks.